I never thought I'd be the mother begging for scraps at her own daughter's door. But there I stood, 73 years old, arthritis screaming through my knees, holding a plastic bag with everything I owned, while my daughter looked at me through the crack in the chain lock like I was a stranger selling magazine subscriptions. She didn't open that door. She just said, "Mom, this isn't a good time," and closed it. The sound of that lock clicking back into place was quieter than a whisper, but it shattered something in me that had already been cracked for years. I had given her everything: my youth, my savings, my home, my dignity. And in that moment, standing in the hallway that smelled like someone else's cooking, I realized I had been so busy being a good mother that I forgot to teach my children how to be good people. But I should start from the beginning, because the betrayal didn't happen overnight. It was a slow poison, administered in doses so small I convinced myself each sip was love. My name is Margaret, and for 50 years I did everything right. I married young, had 3 children, worked double shifts as a nurse while my husband Richard climbed the corporate ladder. We built a beautiful life in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, white picket fence, rose garden, the whole American dream. Richard died of a heart attack when he was 62, and I was 58. The grief nearly killed me, but I had the house, his life insurance, and our 3 children. Christine, the eldest and most ambitious. Michael, the middle child who always needed just one more chance. And Sophie, my baby, who everyone said would take care of me when I got old. That promise turned out to be the cruelest lie I ever believed. After Richard died, the kids started circling. Not with sympathy, with calculators. Christine was a real estate agent, sharp as a knife and twice as cold, and she painted this picture of me rattling around in that big house all alone, wasting money on property taxes and maintenance. "Mom, you could live somewhere smaller, invest the difference, have financial security," she said, her manicured nails tapping against her iPad. Michael agreed immediately. He was always agreeing with whatever got him closer to money. Sophie, my sweet Sophie, was quieter about it, but she nodded along, saying it might be nice for me to have less to worry about. I resisted for 2 years, but eventually they wore me down. Christine found a buyer, a friend of a colleague, she said, and I sold the house for $800,000. After paying off the mortgage and fees, I walked away with $650,000. Christine assured me this was the smart move. She'd help me invest it. She'd make sure I was taken care of. I signed those papers with shaking hands, and I swear I felt Richard's ghost screaming at me to stop. Christine set up a family meeting at her gorgeous colonial with marble countertops and a wine fridge that cost more than my first car. She pulled out a folder. She always had folders, and explained her plan. She would manage my money through her investment accounts. Michael needed $100,000 for a food truck business that was guaranteed to explode. Sophie needed $40,000 for her master's degree, an investment in her future, which meant an investment in my care later. The numbers were swirling, and my head was pounding, but they all looked at me with these expectant faces. Christine had this way of making you feel stupid if you questioned her. Michael had this way of making you feel guilty if you said no. Sophie had this way of looking wounded if you hesitated. So I said yes. I said yes to all of it. Christine transferred the remaining $500,000 into investment accounts she controlled. Michael's food truck launched, failed within 8 months, and he never mentioned paying me back. Sophie finished her degree, got a good job, and slowly stopped calling. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that smelled like exhaust and disappointment, and I told myself this was fine. This was what good mothers did. For 3 years, I lived small. My Social Security and pension covered rent and groceries, barely. I stopped going to the doctor because co-pays added up. I wore the same 5 outfits on rotation. Christine called once a month with updates on my investments. Markets are volatile, but we're playing the long game, Mom, and I believed her because I wanted to. Then I fell. I was reaching for a can of soup on the top shelf, and my balance just went. I hit the kitchen floor hard, and something in my hip made a sound like a branch snapping. I lay there for 4 hours before my neighbor heard me crying through the wall. The hospital said I needed surgery, $45,000, and my insurance only covered $30,000. I needed $15,000 immediately from my investments. I called Christine from the hospital bed. She didn't answer. I called 17 times over 2 days before she finally answered, sounding irritated. There was a pause, so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Christine said something that stopped my heart. "Mom, there's no money." I laughed because it had to be a joke. "What do you mean there's no money?" I had over $500,000. The markets crashed. Bad timing. We lost most of it. Then there were management fees, and honestly, Mom, you've been living off those accounts for years. No, I haven't. I've been living on my pension. Well, there were expenses. The accounts are depleted. There's maybe $8,000 left. $8,000. From $500,000 to $8,000 in 3 years. The math didn't make sense. The world didn't make sense. When I was released from the hospital, I couldn't climb the stairs to my apartment. I called Christine. "Honey, I need help. I can't get into my apartment. Can I stay with you just for a few weeks?" "Mom, Brad and I are really busy with the kids' schedules, and we don't have the space." "You have 5 bedrooms. They're all being used. Maybe Michael can help." Michael's wife said they couldn't accommodate me because she was immunocompromised. Sophie said her place was too small, and she and Derek were trying to start a family. I sat in the hospital discharge area for 6 hours while social services found me a bed in a transitional care facility. It was the kind of place where people went to die slowly, smelling like disinfectant and giving up. That's when I started digging into Christine's investment statements, and I found the first crack in her careful lie. The facility had a computer room where residents could use the internet. I logged into the investment accounts Christine had set up, using passwords she'd given me years ago, probably assuming I'd never look. What I found made me physically ill. The accounts hadn't lost money in a market crash. Christine had systematically withdrawn funds over 3 years, $30,000 here, $50,000 there, always with vague descriptions like estate management fees. She'd paid herself over $200,000 in financial advisor fees for managing my money. The remaining investments had been placed in high-risk ventures that had lost value, but the real damage was her theft. I printed every statement, every transaction record, and I put them in a folder exactly like the ones Christine always carried. But the horror didn't stop there. I called the bank that had processed my house sale. The manager checked the records and gave me a name that made my stomach drop. Bradford Thompson, Christine's husband. They bought my house through an LLC to hide the connection, then sold it immediately for $875,000 and pocketed the $75,000 difference. My daughter had scammed me out of my own home and made a profit on my grief. But I was still thinking too small. I still didn't understand how deep the betrayal went. I tried calling Christine, ready to demand answers. She wouldn't pick up. I called their house line and one of their kids answered, said, "Grandma?" in this surprised voice. Then I heard Christine in the background hiss, "I'm not here." I was too angry to cry, too broken to scream. I couldn't sue. I'd signed papers giving Christine power of attorney. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I was trapped. Then I discovered Michael's secret. A social worker helping me apply for Medicaid needed documentation of my debts, so I requested credit reports. That's when I saw the credit cards, 4 of them, totaling $67,000 in debt, all opened in my name over the past 3 years. The addresses were Michael's old apartment. He'd opened credit cards using my information, maxed them out, and left me with the bill. I called him. For once, he answered. "Michael, did you open credit cards in my name?" Silence. Then, "Mom, I was going to pay them back." "With what money? You've never paid anything back in your entire life." He started crying. Michael always cried when he was caught. I needed them for the business, and then for living expenses. "You committed fraud. Are you going to report me?" But Michael's betrayal was just the opening act. Sophie's was the one that destroyed me. I was moved to subsidized housing after 6 weeks. A studio apartment where the elevator was always broken and the hallways smelled like urine. I had a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford a bed frame. Sophie called me out of nowhere, 3 months later. She sounded cheerful.
Mom.
How are you? I was starved for connection, desperate to hear a kind voice.
I'm okay.
How are you? Great. Derek and I are pregnant. My heart should have soared, but all I felt was cold dread. That's wonderful, honey. Thanks. I'm having a baby shower next month. I wanted to invite you. Where is it? Christine's house. She offered to host. Christine's house. The house she could afford because she'd stolen my money. Sophie, have you talked to Christine about my investments?
Because she stole from me.
Over $200,000. Her voice tightened. Mom, I'm sure it's not. Christine wouldn't.
She did.
I have the statements. And Michael opened credit cards in my name. And all 3 of you abandoned me when I needed help. That's not fair, Mom. We all have lives. I can't be responsible for you forever. You're an adult. You have to figure out your own situation. The words were so cold, so rehearsed. I knew Christine had said them first. So you want me at your baby shower? If you can make it. I understand if it's hard for you to travel. It's a 40-minute bus ride, Sophie. What's hard is realizing you only call when you want something. Maybe you should talk to someone, Mom. You sound really bitter. Bitter. I'd lost everything, and I was bitter. I didn't go to the shower, but I heard about it from a neighbor who saw photos on Facebook. Christine had spared no expense. Sophie looked radiant. Everyone looked happy, and I wasn't there. I hadn't even been missed. Then I got a letter from an attorney representing Christine. She was suing me for defamation because I'd sent an email to family members explaining what she'd done. She wanted $50,000 in damages. I didn't have $50, let alone $50,000. But the threat was clear. Shut up, or I'll destroy what's left of you. That's when I stopped being sad and started getting even. I started documenting everything. I sent the case file to the state attorney general's office with a formal complaint about financial elder abuse. I reported Christine to the real estate licensing board. I filed a police report about Michael's identity theft. Then I went public. A local news station did segments on consumer fraud. I contacted them and told my story. Elderly mother scammed by her own children was too good a headline to pass up. They interviewed me in my studio apartment, filmed the printouts of Christine's withdrawals, showed the credit card statements. I cried on camera, real tears, the kind that come when you finally let the world see your shame. The segment aired on a Wednesday evening. By Thursday morning, it had been picked up nationally. By Friday, it was viral. Thousands of people shared it, commenting about their own experiences with family betrayal. Christine's real estate office was flooded with calls. Michael's employer fired him. Sophie's company received complaints from customers who'd seen her at that lavish baby shower while her mother lived in poverty. And still, none of them called to apologize. They called to blame me. Christine's attorney sent a cease and desist. Michael left me a voicemail calling me a vindictive bitch. Sophie sent a text saying I'd embarrassed the family and she didn't want me in her child's life if I was going to be toxic. But the community rallied. Strangers sent me money, $15,000 in 2 months. A pro bono attorney offered to help me sue. A local church gave me a part-time job. A woman who'd seen my story offered me a room in her house, rent-free. Slowly, painfully, I rebuilt. The Attorney General's office investigated Christine. She eventually settled, returning $150,000, though she admitted no wrongdoing. Michael was charged with identity theft and given probation. Sophie wasn't legally culpable for anything. She'd just been selfish, and selfishness isn't a crime. But the real punishment was the silence. Christine's business never recovered. She and Brad divorced a year later. Michael spiraled, last I heard living in a trailer. Sophie had her baby, a little girl, and I saw one photo online before her account went private. She named the baby Emma, after her paternal grandmother. Not after me. I'm 76 now. I live in that woman's house. Carol, her name is, and we've become family in a way blood never managed. I work part-time at the church, volunteer at the food bank, spend my evenings reading. My hip aches when it rains. I have nightmares about falling, and I've learned to be happy anyway. Not because of my children, in spite of them. Because the truth is this: some people are only capable of loving what you can do for them, not who you are. And my children loved my usefulness, my money, my house, my unconditional forgiveness, but they never loved me. I don't wait for their calls anymore. I don't hope for reconciliation. I don't fantasize about deathbed apologies. I've built a new life from the rubble, and it's smaller, quieter, and more honest. I have friends who choose to be in my life. I have purpose that isn't tied to being needed. I have peace that came from finally admitting that being a good mother didn't mean I was a good judge of character. My children took my money, my house, and my dignity, but they couldn't take my ability to survive. And in the end, that's the one thing I needed most. If you're listening to this and you see yourself in my story, whether as the parent giving too much or the child taking too much, please learn from my mistakes. Love doesn't mean martyrdom. Family doesn't mean endless second chances. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is save yourself. I did. And I'm still here. Some voices stay silent for years. But here, every story finds its sound. Like, subscribe, and stay with the silent parents.